Welcome once again to In Focus with Sid Caudle. And Sid, we've got to start off with Iran, the focus of the Middle East, and a lot goes on there. I mean, haven't times changed since Persia? I mean, the country, it was solid. It produced some fantastic medical brains and other brains. And where is it now? Well, it's in a mess. They've got Khomeini there still going at 85. And now they've lost their prime minister.
Yes, it's very interesting. Of course, yeah, under the Shah, I guess, Iran was very much a country that was under Western influence and very pro-Western. And I think by and large, the people were happy. But you see, the Muslims in Iran managed to overthrow the Shah and bring in this Islamic regime. And of course, the Islamic regime now has been going on for a long time. It was 1979, I believe. So that's 45 years that it's been going. And it's got to a point now where, frankly, the vast majority of people in Iran are utterly fed up. I mean, today we're seeing in this funeral for Mohammad Raisi, we're seeing large numbers of people in the streets. But don't be fooled by that. I mean, that's because all the government workers in Iran have been given the day off and told to go and join the funeral cortege. So if you think, in this country, something like half of all employees are working for the government, and you think there's something probably equivalent going on in Iran, you're talking about millions of people literally working for the government that have been told to go out into the streets. So, this isn't a great outpouring of grief from the average person in Iran. This is people doing what they're told to do. That's the reality of it. But there's the man in the street in Iran, or a lot of people in Iran, have basically had enough of this regime. They really have. And this man that's just died, Raisi, was known as the butcher of Tehran. For 5,000 political prisoners he's responsible for killing, so it's believed. I mean, it's just terrible, terrible. And incidentally, while we're talking about this, there was a young man, a 20-year-old Jew, who was going to be killed yesterday, but his hanging was put off for a month. I don't know exactly why, but presumably, probably part of it was to do with the death of Raisi. But his situation was that he was attacked by 7 Muslim men, and one of them actually owed him a lot of money. So the guy was trying to actually kill him because he owed him money. So he said, if I kill him, he'll be dead and I won't have to pay the money back. So, he came with a whole load of supporters to try and kill this 20-year-old Jewish boy. But what actually happened was that the Jewish boy managed to grab the knife out of his hand and actually killed the man who was trying to kill him. So they're now saying, oh, well, you've got to be hung for that, for killing a Muslim man. I mean, it's obviously self-defense. And obviously hanging him for it is just terrible, terrible injustice, but it's now been postponed for a month, and we hope and pray that the young man's life is spared. But it just goes to show how utterly brutal this Islamic regime is.
Yeah, we can also add at this stage the favorite topic of immigration. There's 2 forms of immigration. One is to swamp the country, and the next one is to swamp the country with Islam. And they're very distinct, Sid. Islam is not a good place to be. I've just been reading an article about Sweden. It has decimated Sweden, and Britain will follow the way things are going. They come in, half of Muslims on the latest stats want a caliphate, and we just sit mildly by and let it happen. And it's, as you said, caused havoc in Iran, and they feed all the dissidents throughout the world.
Well, yes, I mean, you see, the reality is that we don't have integration in this country. You know, there's a lot of people on the left, especially, who are more than happy to welcome Muslims into the UK and to say, yeah, we've got to have equality and so on and so forth. But the Muslims themselves are not interested in being part of the UK. They want to have their own religion and support their own people and so on and so forth, and get their own people elected. I mean, you know, it's if you support the Muslim agenda, then you know Muslims will vote for you, and you've got a lot more chance of being elected. And it's not only one party they're supporting. I mean, they basically support any party that supports them. And it was quite interesting in the last local elections, we saw a situation where, because the Labour Party was against a ceasefire in Gaza, and the Greens and the Lib Dems voted for it, that there were some places like Oldham where the Muslims all voted en masse for the Greens and the Lib Dems, and the Labour Party was actually defeated. So they're not just one party. I've also seen a situation where, because the Labour Party in Newham refused to allow a mega mosque to be built behind West Ham Station, the Muslims all decided to get behind the Conservative Party, who said that they would support the mosque, which was just utter nonsense, frankly. But they didn't mind, you know, putting on blue rosettes and getting behind the Conservative Party if they could punish the Labour Party for not allowing them to build this massive mosque, the largest in Europe, behind West Ham Station. Fortunately, they failed, and the mosque has never been built, you know, but they tried very, very hard.
Indeed, they did. And the rumblings are still there, of course. We've got to say at this stage, and I'll say it at the beginning and at the end of what I'm about to say, certain regimes are rotten. Have we got rottenness in the heart of Britain? One looks at the great days when we had an empire, and whatever anybody tries to tell you, it was probably the best empire that ever existed from a moral point of view. It was based on Judeo-Christian values. And where are they now? Now, it's been highlighted by two things. First of all, of course, what's happened in the NHS, which has gone from the proverbial hero banging your pans on Thursday evenings to zero in the public mind because of what's happening with the blood. There's been cover-up said all the way along. It's now the time to say, take courage, political parties. Do what you daren't do, which you know is right. Demolish it completely and go on the model of 95% of the rest of the world. In other words, state provision living hand in hand with private provision, which we don't get in the NHS. You just get teams of management covering up, telling lies, bringing in private investigators when they suspect that you're a whistleblower, destroying doctors' lives, causing some of them to commit suicide, even to the point of getting people to sign non-disclosure agreements. Tony Blair has been highlighted as extremely culpable by the report, and several other politicians from all parties. This is awful, Sid. But if you analyse it, it's management covering up to cover their own sins, to keep their own jobs, to keep their own positions, which they shouldn't have anyway in most of these Quango type situations. And it's the same with the sub post office, who have been cruelly treated. The sub post offices are exactly the same situation. And it's been cover up after cover up, and successive governments, shame on us, kicking things into the long grass, so they hope enough people will die so they don't have to pay compensation. The two are hand in hand. I repeat what I said at the beginning. Is Britain really rotten at its heart?
Okay, well, we've discussed two massive issues there. So let's just talk about the NHS first and then maybe the post office afterwards. But as far as the NHS is concerned, we don't agree, or I don't agree with you that the right approach is just to dismantle the NHS completely. One of the things that influences me is the simple fact that at the moment, the NHS is costing roughly £2,500 per person in this country, whereas in America and the United States, the public cost of the health system is about £3,500 per person equivalent. So you're talking about 40% more per person is the cost of their health service. And their health service is frankly incredibly expensive for the man in the street, incredibly expensive to insure yourself, and very unsatisfactory for most people. And there's an enormous amount of argument about it. Now, I don't think the right approach is to dismantle the NHS altogether. I think the right approach is to reintroduce the internal market, which is GP fund holding, and reintroduce business ethic into the NHS. Because if we have this situation, which we've got at the moment, which is basically Tony Blair took us back to, where we've got no idea how much anything costs, we just try and do as much as we can, and and it's just a state-run enterprise. There's no market forces and there's no real control, and that's the reality of what's going on now in the NHS. The NHS needs reforming, not abolishing, in my view.
Well, we have to agree to disagree on that one, Sid. I can highlight the fact that we had GP fund holding when this crisis was at its height. That didn't stop what's going on here. It's a fact that the NHS is too big and too bad. We've had the pleasure of living in Southern Europe, so-called much poorer countries, and see how they've got it right here. It's a joy and a safeguard to be living in one of these countries and not with Britain. We've tried so often in the past to put the sticking plaster on. It does not work.
Well, GP fund holding wasn't a sticking plaster. I mean, it was a fundamental reform of the whole system. And the reality is that when we had GP fund holding, it was quite possible. It was relatively easy to get a GP appointment and to go and see your GP. And the GP surgeries were, working very well. Lots of new surgeries were getting built, and new doctors were being taken on at the GP level. And the accident and emergency, as a result, had relatively few people there because the GPs were handling situations which now are going to hospitals. I mean, I went to a hospital just last week, and the accident and emergency section there was absolutely chock-a-block. I mean, you're looking at roughly 50 patients waiting. And you'd also have patients in corridors, in beds, with nowhere to put them. And it's just completely overwhelmed. And it's overwhelmed because the GP system's not working. That's the reality of it, I'm afraid.
Can I suggest an alternative, Sid, that we have here in Spain? A private company was set up 20 years ago called Helicopter Sanitarius. Basically, it was because so many people were being killed on the N340, now the A7 down here, which is a colossal road. And they thought, well, let's rescue people off this road, get a helicopter to at least get them to the hospital quickly. But out of that developed the following. For £200 a year, whatever age you are, you can sign up there and get free ambulance to take you to whichever hospital, or indeed visit your house with a GP, 3 people on board the ambulance, which is really highly equipped, and will treat you at home. If it's a home care case, you can even go to the clinic, the centres. There are 3 on the Costa del Sol. If you didn't want to call the ambulance out, but you can do. £200 a year. That would never happen in Britain because the doctors compared with much of Europe, are grossly, and I know I'm going to be populist to say this, but I can prove it, overpaid. The average doctor in Spain gets 40,000, a little bit less actually, a year. The average doctor in UK is well over 100, averages I'm talking about now, 1,000. So that you couldn't charge £200 per person. But let's say we charged £400, doubled it in Britain. You would have a queue so long, and that would solve 90% of the problems. That's what bringing in good private companies can do, to work hand in hand with whatever Seguridad Social, whatever NHS you have in your own country. But it won't happen. And there's another reason it won't happen. That's the BMA. They don't want it to happen.
Okay, I mean, yeah, these are very interesting points. I mean, you see, it was actually that Tony Blair that, vowed that he was going to put enormous amounts of extra money in the NHS and greatly increase the pay of doctors and GPs. And the result of that, so I'm told by people in the profession, was that large numbers of GPs just went part-time. Instead of working for 5 days, they could work for 3 days and earn the same amount of money. And the result of that was a lot of less health provision when you increase the pay. So I mean, I don't know. I mean, to be quite honest with you, from what I've seen in terms of what junior hospital doctors have to do to get qualified, they have to work incredibly hard. They have to work incredibly hard at university, and they have to work incredibly hard afterwards in order to get to the position of being a consultant. Once they arrive at the position of being a consultant, it's a very, very lucrative job, but they have to work extremely hard to get to that place. So, I mean, I don't know, but I mean, I think it's absolutely right to look at other ideas and look at the way other countries are working, and forget about the BMA. At the end of the day, it's up to the government to say, this is the system that we want, and this is the system that works. And the BMA can object if they like. But I mean, if they're all going to go on strike because we want to improve the system, then that's something we've got to overcome. We can't allow trade unions or the BMA or any trade union to dictate government policy. We have to decide what is right and the correct policy for the country. And then if the trade unions don't like it, we have to negotiate, we have to talk. But ultimately, if they refuse to talk, you have to impose what is the best system. That's the reality of it.
One big tick, one must say, for the head of the BMA this week was to call out the problems. And that is 250 people are dying every day because of the inefficiency of the NHS in hospital corridors, in ambulances, and by other serious ways of neglect. Well done him. There is a mega problem. We know that.
I'm not denying that. I'm not denying there's a big problem.
And it will carry on, Sid, unless somebody's got the political will to do something. But take us to the post office. Very similar. I think they're parallel.
Well, you see, what's really annoyed me about the post office is we got this woman, Paula Venables, who was in charge of the post office for many years, who's now saying, oh, there's nothing wrong with what we did. What we did was fine. And you've got sub postmasters who were taken to court for corruption, for thousands of pounds of money that had gone missing, and the money hadn't gone missing at all. It was just a fault of the computer system. But she's, instead of actually admitting that, oh yeah, we made major mistakes here, we had major errors, and we've got to put it right. All these people must be compensated, which is what she should be saying. She's basically like an ostrich sticking her head in the sand and pretending that nothing was wrong. But just to make matters worse, this woman, Paula Venables, who is now saying, nothing was wrong, even though she blatantly was actually in line to be appointed as a Bishop of London. And it's like, what? I mean, she hadn't even been a church leader. She was just qualified, as an ancillary vicar. But, she never actually led a church. but they wanted to make a Bishop of London because of her business experience. But her business experience was leading an organisation which was frankly utterly corrupt. And it's just like, what? I mean, really, that woman should be utterly ashamed of herself. And frankly, I think she should face criminal charges, because what's gone on is just been completely and utterly unacceptable. And, you know, if you immediately apologize and say, yes, things are put right, then that's okay. But if you say, I'm not apologizing and I don't accept I've done anything wrong, then I think she should face the courts, frankly.
Yep. Move on, Sid. Apparently, we're on the edge of World War III. We've been on this edge for donkey's years, and it keeps coming up. It's like the August newspapers, they've got to dig something up. But are we, with what's happening in Israel, with Gaza? Are we with what's happening in the Ukraine? People are digging, actually. And a lot of people have come up with a complete conclusion that actually it's safer now because of Ukraine. We are less likely to have World War III. Why? Well, number one, Russia has proved itself not to be the power that we thought she was. She'd made too many mistakes. Why hasn't she got it all over with? It's overwhelming, you would have thought. But there we are, it continues. We've learned a lot as well about warfare. The tanks are proving largely useless. But the $400 drone is killing tanks and killing people, sadly, and at a minuscule cost. We're learning an awful lot about warfare, whether it's going to be good warfare or bad warfare. Are less people going to be killed to win a war in the future? Well, lessons have to be learnt.
Yes, you see, one of the things that people have to appreciate is that it's always been the case that if a powerful country invades another country, then they have to have a superiority of something like 4-1, I believe. You know, because there is the country being invaded has the moral high ground. And because they have the moral high ground, their people are willing to fight harder and be more courageous than the soldiers that are invading, because they know that what they're doing is wrong. And Russia, that's what Russia has really found out right from the beginning. And see, right at the very beginning of this invasion, they thought that they could just bring their soldiers into the airport outside Kiev, and so bring all their trucks and provisions and whatever into the airport just outside Kiev. They would take it over. They put in the paratroopers to take it over, to take over the airport, bring in all the trucks and everything, have that as a base and a headquarters from which they would then take Kiev. That was, and they thought they could do it all in the space of about a week. But the first thing that happened was that Ukraine defended that airport successfully. So the Russians were unable to take it over. And the result of that was that you then had this massive queue of trucks and with all their provisions and et cetera, as well as soldiers in them, that had nowhere to go because they were just stuck on the highway. That was the first success of Ukraine, and basically meant that the Russians, instead of being able to take over Ukraine quickly, to take over Kiev, quickly, never took Kiev, and in the end gave up all that initial area that they'd taken around Kiev and abandoned it completely, and just went over and fought in the east, where they've had a lot more success. But you had this stalemate. But what's happened is terrible, frankly. It's absolutely terrible, because there have been thousands and thousands of Russians, innocent Russians, frankly, who've been forced to fight under conscription. A lot of them don't want to fight, but they've been forced to fight, and they've had thousands and thousands killed, as well as all the Ukrainians that have been killed through what the Russians have done. But yes, I mean, we have found out that drones have been incredibly effective. But it's always been a case that, you know, if you have power in the air, then power in the air can knock out tanks, and is absolutely essential for an invasion. The Ukrainian Air Force has been vastly inferior to the Russian Air Force, but the Russians haven't been able to have total air superiority. And by bringing in the drones, that's also been incredibly useful for actually having some power in the air. So the Ukrainians have been able to have some power in the air, plus having very effective anti-aircraft missiles, which has also made it very difficult for Russian planes. When they've shot down an enormous number of Russian aircraft, so that the Russians haven't had total superiority in the air. And that's another reason we've had this stalemate. But, yes, you're absolutely right. Russia has proved itself that they can't just invade Ukraine and take it in a week, which is what they expected, which frankly also, by the way, is what Biden expected, because he was actually telling Zelensky, I'll help you to flee, get out. And, because you won't be able to defeat the Russian army. But of course, Biden was wrong. And it was actually Boris Johnson, exactly, was the first person to actually tell Zelensky, we're standing with you, we'll help you and support you. And then after he took that position, and it actually worked because Zelensky was able to resist the Russian assault, that Biden and other countries then came on board and started to also give support to Zelensky. This is, by the way, let me just say this. This is also, by the way, why Putin is absolutely furious with Britain, because Britain was the first country to stand with Zelensky when America was ready to give up.
Yes, indeed. Sid, we're moving on. I've got a curved ball for you now. Is it an elephant in the room? Dare nobody ask this? We dare to ask it. Rishi, he's just in a loving at the moment in Austria. They think he's wonderful, and vice versa. Trade talks, etc. And we agree on the Rwanda issue, apparently. And more countries are going towards the Rwanda solution. Let's wait and see if it works. That's for another time for discussion. But what's the elephant in the room? Well, Britain famously is supposed to be the best country in the world for not being in the least bit racial. So we welcome everybody. And we're the last country to be accused of racism. But do we hide something here? Do we possibly think that Rishi is really so low in the polls without certain parts of our country, regrettably, being racist? He's Indian. Now, has that got any effect, Sid?
Well, it's certainly not in my mind. Rishi Sunak, of course, has been a very, very successful businessman, and so is his wife, and they're both incredibly wealthy. I believe they're both on the rich list in the UK. But we don't judge him by, his race. I mean, that's the last thing we judge him by. We judge him by how well he's performing as Prime Minister.
Well, I said we don't judge him by his race, but is there an element, and maybe a sizable one in UK, that traditionally has always been reticent about comers in?
Well, if they are, then that's not the right approach. The right approach is to look at, what he's actually accomplished as Prime Minister and how successful he's been. And I'm totally opposed, frankly, to Rishi Sunak undermining and getting rid of Boris Johnson. I think that was a massive, massive mistake. And if people don't believe it, he was absolutely the key figure in getting rid of Boris Johnson. And he thought, of course, that he would then inherit the prime ministership, but he was defeated by Liz Truss. And Liz Truss took over, but what she did is history. But Rishi Sunak managed to get her out of the way as well. So he then took power, and the way he took power, I think, was frankly awful. But I think he is beginning to win people over to a degree. I think the thing is, what's going on now in the UK is that there is a mood, if you like, to punish the Conservatives, but I think the majority of people don't particularly want Keir Starmer to come in as Prime Minister. There's no great move or desire to welcome Keir Starmer as the new Prime Minister. But people do tend to vote negatively. People do tend to more interested in getting rid of this than they are in bringing in this party. So we'll have to wait and see what happens. The expectation now is that Keir Starmer will be Prime Minister very soon, but I don't think personally it's a foregone conclusion. I think it'll be, the next election will be much closer than people are expecting right now.
Yeah, there's evidence to back up what you said, quite a lot of evidence in actual fact. Now, whether the average person has come across, well, there are two here. Let's start with Matthew Goodwin. Now, Matt Goodwin, professor at Kent University, is one of the few professors in our unis that are actually right of centre. And he's got a massive blog going, 34,000 followers. And he speaks a lot of sense. He really does, Sid. He's the closest thing, dare I say, to you that we can get. And basically, he's saying now that if he gets 100,000 followers, that will be his mandate to get other people together from the smaller parties to put up a fight. Now, I personally can't see that this happening this year. It won't solve this problems, but maybe for the next Parliament, it could do. It's clear that Sir Keir wants 10 years. He sees that as his aim, or is it an excuse for doing nothing and the things not happening? It's not going to be easy for anybody taking over this government, let's be honest. But is there any merit in these people, these upstarts coming in and saying, we've not had basically conservatism, which most people know now, for donkey's years. Let's get back to true conservatism. Is this one way?
Well, it's absolutely essential that we have a proper policy debate. And we can't have this situation ad infinitum where people are, oh, we've got to just get rid of this party and who cares what comes in, it doesn't matter as long as we get rid of this party. You see, the problem is when that's the way people are voting, and it basically gives an excuse for the party that's coming in just to do anything they want without even bothering to worry much about their policy. But this is the way the Labour Party is behaving, and frankly, Angela Rayner's the worst. I mean, every time she's asked, what's your policy, even for instance on the triple lock for pensioners, what's your policy on the triple lock? Are you going to maintain the triple lock? Her answer is, well, it's up to the Tories. They're in power. The Tories have got to maintain it. They promised to maintain it. Yeah, but okay. But if you come into power, will you maintain the triple lock? Well, we can't make that decision now. We can only make the decision when we're in power. In other words, I'm not even going to tell you the answer. I'm not even going to talk about our policies. I'm only going to talk about how bad the Tories are. And that's what she gives as an answer to every single question that she's asked. And frankly, it's unacceptable. You see, the thing about the Christian People's Alliance, in my view, I know I'm biased, but we've got by far the best manifesto, a much better manifesto than Reform UK, and a much better manifesto than the Conservatives or the Labour Party across the board. Because I've talked about it in the past, of what we would do in relation to quangos and what we would do in relation to government contracts, what we would do in relation to a turnover tax to get money off Google and Amazon and Facebook and Starbucks, what we would do with all this money and how we would actually greatly improve the economy across the board. Now, see, whether you actually agree or disagree with the policies we're putting forward, we should at least have that debate. We should be having that policy debate. And it should be possible for people to say, yes, I like what that party's standing for and I'm going to vote for them and for them to get elected. But you see, our electoral system basically lends itself towards negative voting. And that's the reality of it. You see, there's nothing wrong in principle with having, a system where, you elect a constituency MP that then looks after that constituency. But in reality, what happens is that smaller parties are pushed aside. Now, you see, you have a very different situation, for instance, in Holland, where you've got a plethora of smaller parties. But because of their voting system, it means that new parties can come to the fore and get people in parliament, including Christian parties, which have been part of the government in Holland. And, and they can look at different ideas, consider different ideas and vote for them, including, by the way, the Farmers' Party that was quite successful in Holland, protesting about the way that farmers were being treated. And large numbers of people voted for them because they were treated so badly. We couldn't have that in the UK. If farmers are treated badly in the UK, it's just like, well, it's tough, isn't it? It's just like no one can come along and vote to help the farmers because they can't get a big enough party to be Conservative and Labour. You see, and that needs addressing if we're going to have proper policy debate.
Another person that's put his head above the parapet besides Matt Goodwin, your favourite man, in some senses, Jacob Rees-Mogg. Now, he gave a dissertation last week saying that, could this be the solution? He was largely ignored. And I think that was disgraceful because I think it's possibly a way forward, at least to keep Sir Keir at bay. And his answer, somewhat similar to Matt Goodwin's, is that we get hold of reform, that we get hold of Boris, that we get hold of Nigel, and together we go to the right wing of the Conservative Party, do a deal with true Conservatives and any other smaller parties that want to come along. And if you do the maths, it's pretty close to where Sir Keir is at the moment in the polls. And then we can have a real competition that Tories, the average Tory, would not be required to hold their nose and vote for Tory again, or indeed abstain. Is this a real solution?
Well, you see, I think we have to be aware that in the last general election, the Brexit Party agreed not to stand against any sitting Conservative MP. I mean, it didn't make that much difference, as it turned out, because the Conservatives still won enormous amounts of Labour seats and the Brexit Party didn't win any seats at all. But it does show that party, which obviously Reform UK is a successor to the Brexit Party, it does show that party is willing to do a deal with the Conservatives. That's the first point to make, because if it's like, oh, Reform UK, they'll never be interested in that. No, they have shown that they're willing to do a deal. So now the ball's back in the Conservative Party, and the way the Conservative Party is at the moment in the opinion polls, they're 20% down and looking at massive electoral defeat. So they can't afford just to say, oh, we're not interested in any sort of electoral pact. We're the Conservative Party and we're by far the biggest party and we're just going to fight every seat without any fear or favour. No, it would be very much in the interest of the Conservative Party to talk to Reform UK and to come to some sort of deal. And if they have a deal where, these are the seats that we're going to concentrate on, and you concentrate on these seats, then and we'll work together, that would actually clearly be in the interest of both parties. And in my view, Jacob Rees-Mogg is absolutely right. And of course, I mean, the Labour Party and the Liberal Democrats are immediately saying, oh, Jacob Rees-Mogg should be removed from Parliament for this. He should be sacked from the Conservative Party. Yes, because they know it's not in their interests. It's certainly not in the interest of the Liberal Democrats to see Reform UK and the Conservative Party working together effectively to make a better alternative. But under our electoral system, this is exactly what is needed, I'm afraid.
Would you yourself throw your cap in the ring?
Well, absolutely. I mean, if we were invited to talk, we would absolutely talk. But, we need to be in a position first where we're getting thousands of votes. And unfortunately, even in these last London elections, from the whole of London, we got 27,000, which was disappointing. I mean, we were expecting and hoping to get at least 100,000. But, you know, to be in the ring, we need to be getting thousands of votes. If we start getting thousands of votes and we start getting Christians voting for us, which they should be, frankly, then we will be in the discussions, and we can start having a real influence on policy and start having Christians elected into Parliament, which is what we want.
So things are sneaking out from, at last, the Labour Party of what they will be like. Now, whether we believe them or not, or whether they're just flying a kite, one doesn't know. One of the things that's sneaking out is they want to put, apparently, a cap on the rent scheme because it's totally out of hand. You've got increases of 11% in 1 year in various parts of the country, only because they've heard what could happen under Labour. That horrible question that keeps coming up about immigration. Certain people have got the courage to say, hang on, don't let's go wildly building 400,000 houses, 600,000 houses. Let's first of all, again, back to elephants in room, stop immigration. That's 70% of the problem cured before we start building houses. But that's the situation we're in, Sid. But if Labour want to interfere with the free market, which they are famous for doing, it's going to lead to disaster and more rent rises.
No, absolutely, totally. And they've got to understand this, frankly. They've got to understand that if they start clamping down on landlords, and their favourite one at the moment is to say they're going to introduce make it illegal to evict a tenant who's paid the rent. See, the problem is, if you do that, then, you know, I mean, I've got a situation at the moment where I've got a property which I'm renting out in London, and there's a tenancy agreement that runs out in 2026. In 2026, I'm going to want to sell that property. You know, because I can't afford to continue with the mortgage. Now, under these rules, it's, you know, if the tenant continues to pay the rent, it'll be impossible for me to say your tenancy has come to an end. I now want to sell the property. I mean, it's just, you know, it's mad, frankly, and it makes it almost impossible for small landlords. I mean, this is the only domestic property I've got rented out. I've only got one. You know, I've got one commercial property as well, which is also rented out. You know, but I'm not a big landlord. But, you know, they've got to encourage private landlords, not discourage them. And I've had a situation where in that property, actually, the tenant wasn't paying the rent for a whole period of time, which coincided with you know, two people dying. I mean, the mother died first, and the father died, and then the people left in the property didn't pay the rent, and that coincided with COVID. So I actually took them to court, and then the court sent back all the paperwork and said, because of COVID, no one can be evicted at the moment. So I was actually left with virtually no rent for a period of about 2 years. And eventually, I'm glad to say, the situation was sorted out, and you know, they started paying the rent again properly. So the rent's been paid properly now for probably for 3 years. But, you know, it's you know, it's I found it more. I mean, I know COVID was a problem, but I found it almost actually impossible to evict a tenant at that time. You know, which, you know, it's
My sympathies are with you, Sid. We've been in exactly the same situation. And unfortunately, the naughty boys in this know how to get around the law. And the real people that are, quite frankly, on the verge of being miscreants and should be in an institution, some of them indeed in prison, know exactly what the way around the law is. They can be there for years. It's a shame on the occasional good person that is thrown out with the proverbial bathwater. But I'll tell you something else. Staying in our family, go to Canada. They've had this for years. It's causing absolute havoc. We should be looking more abroad as a nation. All nations are very myopic to see outside their own curtilage. They think, oh, we've got the best country in the world. No, you haven't. Learn from other countries. It will help you to become perhaps the best country in the world. But doing it by this sort of, and they will, as sure as eggs is eggs, get hold of this. It's the same with private education, where they want to add the VAT. That's absolutely idiotic. It's going to cost us a fortune, and with the nom-doms. But that's for a discussion the other day. But beware, people.
Yeah, before we move on, let me just say, but we don't only have to look at other countries. We can also have a look at what happened in our country in the 1970s, when the Labour Party was in power and attacked the landlords then. And it was a complete disaster for private rented accommodation. They're only going back. The Labour Party are now saying they're going to go back to what they did in the 1970s. I mean, that's the reality of it. And it will be disastrous, frankly.
Right, finally, Sid, we move on to the real discussion. We keep saying this every week, but I mean, it seems to wind you up, so I'll keep with it. We go into football, of course, or soccer, whichever you want. And, well, there are two major things happening at the moment. One, of course, is these wretched cameras, VAR, that have been polluting our game. I know you don't agree with me, for years, it seems. But now there's going to be a big fight, because the big boys want to keep them. Wonder why. The smaller or middle-sized boys at Wolves hate them because they've really had a bad time with VAR. But I tell you who wants to see them go. All the fans. Manchester City, Liverpool, Manchester United all want to keep with VAR, but their fans hate it. Listen to the fans. They vote for you. Big clubs, you've already got too much power. Facts have emerged when there's been an investigation, as there was bound to be, onto VAR decisions. It's made no difference, even a slight negative difference, to having a referee making a complete clown of himself from time to time. We're all human. That will happen. Get over it. But it's not ruining in the game. In fact, one or two other countries are starting to ban it. Let's follow what other countries are doing. Go on, Sid.
Well, it's I understand the argument that people would say that, well, these decisions even themselves out. A referee can make a mistake one way and then make a mistake another way, and even though he may make a wrong decision on an offside or wrong decision on a handball, they all even themselves out over a season, and it's we just have to accept it and get on with it. But in the sense of fair play, in the sense of justice, I mean, having a camera that can review a decision and look at a decision quickly, I think is very important. I mean, we had a situation last night where, as I told you, I mean, the team that I support, Reading, had an under-21 semi-final against Sunderland. And there were two very clear penalties there, which the referee turned down. But of course, because it was under 21, there was no VAR. But if there had been VAR, they could have had a look at it. And I think the VAR cameras would have said very clearly that penalties should be granted. So I think it's good that the referee can say, OK, yeah, I couldn't see that very clearly. In my opinion, was no penalty, but I'm willing to look at the cameras and see what the cameras say. I think that's healthy.
Oh, but yeah, he's got no credit. I mean, for goodness sake, he supports Reading. You can't believe a word he says about football. But we're going to stick with it, actually. We're going to say Manchester City. Well, 4 times champions. Well done them. They've got the best team in the world. Everybody recognises that. But it's not surprised they've broken the rules. And when teams like Everton, as an example, and other get docked so many points that completely ruin the season, that's the least that Manchester City can expect if they get round to doing them. 115 counts. Well, is there talk, or again, are they going to duck it and not take the championship off them? They've clearly broken 115 rules to get the best players in the world. Arab influence in our football teams is not. I rejoice when people stick with home money rather than get money from abroad. Even Man U going to the Glazers, and it's come back to bite them, of course. Sid, yeah, what's going to happen? Go on, look in your crystal ball.
Well, it's not that straightforward for Manchester City, because even they see what they do is they look over this over 3 seasons, rightly or wrongly. And then they say, okay, over 3 seasons, you cannot, have a greater deficit than a certain amount. And of course, this is where my club fell short, because you see, none of the problems with looking at over 3 seasons is that even though you may have overspent, they then say, okay, over 3 seasons you've overspent, you've got too big a deficit, so we're docking you 8 points. And and what happened in Reading's case is they dock them 8 points, and they then say, right, we have a complete ban on all transfers. So they had a complete ban on all transfers. But then, of course, the following season, they've still got 2 of those seasons included, even though they've now got a complete ban on transfers. So then they docked another. This last season, Reading were docked another 6 points, which makes it very difficult. But in Man City's case, last season, they made a profit of 500 million because now they've brought in these players and been successful. So when you now average over 3 seasons, even they're no longer in deficit. So it's not completely clear in Man City's situation. That's why you haven't had a decision that's taken, because they've quickly come back into a massive profit. So we'll have to wait and see. But essentially, according to the rules, in order to get where they are today, they have cheated. That's the reality of it.
Well, Pep Guardiola, that has everybody's support, he's a superb manager, has seen the light and has hinted what many people have known for actually 18 months. He will soon be off ski because he doesn't want to be restrained in any way. So good luck to him.
Just on Guardiola, you see, he's done brilliantly in Spain. He's done brilliantly in Germany. He's done brilliantly in Britain. The only country he hasn't been to is Italy. So I think Guardiola will probably take on board Juventus or AC Milan, some club in Italy, and then see whether he can do brilliantly in Italy, and then he'll retire.
Back to the crystal ball. Well, finally, Sid, I've got for everybody to think about. If people were as passionate about politics as they are about football, would we have a better country?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question. People do get very passionate about football and very keen on it. And I think it's a good let out. The problem with politics is that you have to be very, very clever with politics, in order to see and understand the right approach and what's going on. You see, just to underline that point, one of the things that's very interesting with all these demonstrations that's going on all over the world at the moment in support of Hamas, we've had journalists go up to these demonstrators and say, okay, you're chanting from the river to the sea. Which river are you talking about? What sea are you talking about? It's like, I don't know. You don't know? Oh, and then they ask them, just keep asking them questions. And it suddenly turns out, you don't know what they're talking about. You actually realize that what you're chanting for is to have all Jews exterminated. That is in the Hamas charter. That's what you're supporting. Oh, am I? Oh, I didn't know I was supporting that. You see, when it comes down to politics, you have to be very, very clever, and you have to do a lot of analysis, and you have to think very hard. That's why you got people like Jacob Rees-Mogg, are so good, because he's a very, very clever individual. In football, I mean, you need a certain amount of knowledge, but you can be completely ignorant and still thoroughly enjoy the game.
Whereas, Sid, all the people on the terrace are just thick. Oh, well, there we go. That'll get you some votes for the next election.
I'm not saying that, but I'm saying that you can have no knowledge at all and still very much enjoy the game.
There you go. Oh, something for everyone there. Sid, we'll see you next week. Thank you so much.